200 blog posts shared on social media all showed localhost 3000 as the URL. The root layout static metadata was being used for every dynamic page. The generateMetadata function signature changed in Next.js 15 where params became a promise. In Next.js 16 this is still the case, you must await params before accessing its properties. The article correctly uses params, promise slug, string, and await params, but older tutorials may show synchronous access, which will break in Next.js 16. The article mentions using custom fonts in OG images, but doesn't show how. Here's a snippet that loads a Google font and uses it in the image response template. Social platforms cache OG data aggressively, sometimes for days. After updating OG tags, always force a fresh scrape using the Facebook sharing debugger or Twitter card validator. Appending a cache-busting query parameter like v=2 to the OG image URL can help, but the best practice is to use the debugger tools to clear the cache. The article mentions automating validation in CI, but doesn't provide a concrete script. Here's a GitHub action step that checks OG tags on critical routes using curl and grep. Let's break down metadata and SEO in Next.js 16, from basics to dynamic OG images, how it works, and the exact mistake behind that failure. Next.js Metadata API is a system for managing HTML metadata, open graph tags, Twitter cards, sitemaps, and search engine indexing. It provides a typed interface for setting title, description, canonical URLs, and social sharing tags. generateMetadata enables per-page dynamic metadata based on root params and fetched data. Static metadata is defined at build time and applies to all pages under that layout. Use it for the root layout, site name, global OG image, favicon. generateMetadata is an async function that runs at request time, receiving params and search params. Use it for any dynamic page, blog posts, product pages, user profiles. Here's a root layout with static metadata. It sets a title template, description, metadataBase, and default OG and Twitter settings. This is the fallback for all pages. This is the correct pattern. generateMetadata fetches the post data and returns unique title, description, and OG tags for each blog post. Every dynamic page must have this. The metadata object is rich. Title can be a string or an object with default and template. Description should be 5160 characters. metadataBase sets the base URL for all relative URLs, critical for OG images. Open Graph and Twitter control social previews. Here's a complete generateMetadata example. It includes canonical URL, OG tags with article type and publish time, and Twitter card. Always provide a default OG image for pages without custom images. Creating a unique OG image for every page manually is impossible at scale. At Versal/OG lets you generate OG images dynamically using JSX and CSS. The image is rendered as a PNG on the server and cached. Create an API route at app/og/route, TSX. It receives query params like title and renders a 1200x630 PNG. Then reference it in generateMetadata, images, URL, og title plus encode URI component post, title. Next.js 16 generates sitemaps with app/sitemap, TS. Export a static array or an async function that fetches URLs. Robots, TS tells search engines which paths to crawl. Always block non-production environments. This sitemap includes static pages and dynamic blog posts. Each entry has a URL, last modified, change frequency, and priority. Google uses this to discover all your pages. Robots, TS exports rules for allowed and disallowed paths, plus a sitemap reference. For per-page control, set robots in metadata. Block admin and API routes. Duplicate content confuses search engines. Canonical URLs tell Google which URL is authoritative. Set it in generateMetadata using alternates canonical. Always use the cleanest version of the URL. Set canonical URL in generateMetadata. Use middleware to strip query params from the URL before it reaches the page. This prevents duplicate content from tracking parameters. Structured data helps search engines understand your content beyond meta tags. Next.js has no built-in support, so inject JSON-LD using a script tag. Rich results have 20–40% higher click-through rates. Create a helper component that accepts content and returns the schema object. Render it in your page component. Use article schema for blog posts, product for e-commerce. Never deploy metadata changes without validation. Use Facebook Sharing Debugger, Twitter Card Validator, and Google Rich Results Test. Automate with a CI step that crawls critical routes and verifies OG tags. This CI script curls critical routes and greps for OG and Twitter tags. Add it to your deployment pipeline to catch missing metadata before it reaches production. Your route layout's metadataBase should never be localhost in production. Use environment variables. For staging, block search indexing entirely. Conditionally disable sitemaps in non-production environments. This pattern sets metadataBase and robots based on the environment. In production, allow indexing. In preview or development, block robots. Never leak staging URLs to search engines. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that happened. The team had static metadata in the route layout but no generate-metadata on the blog page. Next.js used the layout's metadata for every post, and metadataBase was set to http://localhost 3000, never changed to production, so every social share showed localhost. Static metadata in route layout applied to all pages because dynamic blog pages lacked generate-metadata, causing every blog post to inherit the layout's static title and description. The fix: add generate-metadata to the blog page that fetches the post and returns dynamic title, description, OG image, and canonical URL. Change metadataBase to use process.env, site URL. Add a default OG image for pages without custom images. Never hardcode localhost. Without metadataBase set to the production URL, relative OG image URLs break. Social platforms resolve them against the shared URL, which becomes localhost. Always use an environment variable. This is the exact line that caused the incident. Hardcoding localhost in metadataBase means every relative URL resolves to localhost. Always use an environment variable. If you don't export generate-metadata from a dynamic page, Next.js merges the parent layout static metadata with the root. Every blog post gets the same title and description. Unique page info is lost. To debug metadata issues, first check metadataBase in your layout. Then verify that every dynamic page exports generate-metadata. Use curl to inspect OG tags. Validate with Facebook and Twitter debuggers before deployment. Let's run through some common interview questions. Difference between static metadata and generate-metadata. Static is build time constant. Generate-metadata is request time dynamic, required for dynamic pages. How does metadataBase work? It sets the base URL for relative metadata URLs. If not set, relative OG URLs break. Always set to production URL via env variable. Design SEO architecture for a SaaS platform. Route layout defaults generate metadata per dynamic page, sitemap, TS robots, TS JSON-LD, CI validation. And a few frequently asked questions. What is the difference between static metadata and generate-metadata? Static is build time constant. Generate-metadata is request time async function for dynamic pages. Why does my social share show localhost? MetadataBase is not set to production URL. Set it via environment variable. How to generate dynamic OG images at scale. Use at versal/og with a single endpoint. Cache with immutable headers. Reference in generate-metadata. Let's recap the key takeaways. Static metadata for layout defaults. Generate-metadata for every dynamic page. MetadataBase must be production URL. Always provide OG tags and Twitter cards. Ready to go deeper? Up next, deploying Next.js 16, Versal, self-hosting, and static export, then dynamic routes, route groups, and advanced routing patterns, then parallel routes and intercepting routes in Next.js 16 and middleware in Next.js 16, complete guide with auth patterns. Find them all at TheCodeForge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at thecodeforge.io.